Welcome to another Shay's Insights video. So glad you're here. I really enjoy doing these where we do a video to follow on to an article. And the last article we had, which was these unexpected changing times and spiritual growth. And I want to talk a little bit about that. And as always, I have my notes here because I like to keep my presentation in the same order as the article. So, with that said, change has been accelerated due to a once-in-a-century pandemic. But the change was already occurring, and I want to talk about that again in a moment or two. But if we look at history, over the patterns over the centuries, throughout history, the end of one phase, as it's ending, always gives way to another, almost always an improved one. The Renaissance, the original one, is an example of that, and I'll get to it in a minute. But as we mentioned in the article, and I like to refer to him because I think he's a really inspirational person, is Anthony Robbins, or Tony Robbins. He's a very famous businessman and inspirational teacher, and he really has helped a lot of people move out of being stuck into success. He's done this with military, he's done it with sports people, just a whole, and obviously business people. And one of the things he talks about is when, in life, or even whether it's our personal life or society, at the end of one phase or a transition, and we're moving into the next one, the old is fading away and the new one's coming in, and in that middle part, he calls no man's land, or we also refer to it as the messy middle, because you're neither where you were nor where you're going. The certainties of how things used to be aren't there, and the new patterns of what we're seeking aren't there either. So we're kind of like, well, hey, is everything okay? It doesn't quite feel right now. And with that, as I often like to refer to in our posts, is the Renaissance, because it's just emblematic of this very process. Now, the original Renaissance started in the late 1300s and into the 1400s, and that was the end of the Dark Ages, which really, truly were not so fun time. It was a really yucky time for society. Anyway, and it was just an explosion of the arts and the sciences and politics and economics. All kinds of new things happened, and many of them are still with us today. But it was also an era of major disruption for the masses. Now, at the time, and I don't know if I mentioned this in the article, I don't think I did, there were four basically classes of people, and they were the nobles, or the aristocracy, and we all know about that, earls, lords, kings, queens, that sort of thing. You had tradesmen, professional tradesmen, and they're usually part of larger families, well-established, very rich, owned lots of land as well. And land ownership at the time was a major, major thing, and only the nobles and the rich people could have it. Then you had, related to the tradesmen, you had the merchant class. Again, were very rich, but they may not have been tradesmen, but they had lots of money and they had well-established businesses, could have been shipping, that sort of thing. And then you had the peasants, or what we would call unskilled labor. And they are the ones who are really left wondering what's going on, just as it is in society, because most of us work for someone. You could say it's not necessarily unskilled labor, but we're working for someone. We're not necessarily running our own business. And we are on the receiving end of the changes, and it can really feel uneasy when we don't know what's going on. Now, hindsight being that wonderful 20/20 animal, it's obvious now, referring to the Renaissance, of all the benefits and all the wonderful cultural and scientific evolutions that came out of that really benefited it, brought us into the Industrial Revolution, and of course now that fed into the high-tech evolution that we're in right now. But all of that happened then. What's clear to us now wasn't really clear back then. I mean, they didn't know what was going to happen. They weren't sure, am I going to starve to death, or what's going to happen here? So there were some real existential concerns at the time. And there are people who today who are concerned about it, although we have a safety net, they're still concerned about their livelihood and their families. But we are moving out of the old, as I mentioned before, and moving into the new. So we are moving into the positive patterns, but they haven't fully crystallized yet. And this has been known for decades. When I took my first meditation seminar, it was from a lady, her name was June Distel. So she has a book out there, and some of them may have actually read it. And in the 1980s and 90s, she talked about these times we're in, and I know this is the theme of many of our articles and videos, but the incoming energies are raising the frequency of the planet. And it's really accelerating things. And one of the examples I can use, and I'm going to refer back to June in just a second again, is one of the classes that we do in meditation, which is to reach the alpha state. And then people who, back in the late 70s and 80s, Zen masters and Buddhist monks, those kinds of people were people who could reach the theta state on a regular basis. It was really challenging back then because the energetic environment just wasn't what it is today. Would take people 6 months, a year of constant practice to be able to reach those states. Nowadays, we in our seminars, and they're 3-day seminars, they're usually a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And even in our first seminar, which is really focused on getting people into the alpha state, which is 7 to 14 hertz or cycles per second for brainwave states. It's daydreaming, flights of fancy, again, meditation. People are now reaching the theta state by Saturday afternoon, which is 4 to 7 hertz. That's deep sleep, hypnosis, that sort of state. Very powerful state for meditating. You can really do wonderful things at that state. But my point is these accelerated times that we're in energetically, the raising of the frequency, have caused it. And one of the side effects of that, and June talked about it way back then, the 70s, 80s, and 90s, was you're going to have a breakdown of the social structures in society throughout the world, but in the United States, Canada, North America, but again, it's going to be everywhere. And as the new patterns come in, so the old patterns, again, going back to Anthony Robbins, are fading. The new ones are coming in, but they haven't fully crystallized. And part of that is going to be causing a little bit of a bumpy ride. This is what she talked about as well, June did. She said the social patterns would break down, accompanied by many systems of government and business. And it would be particularly bumpy for those, or a bumpy ride for those who, without a good spiritual foundation or connection, spiritual connection or sense of community. And we'll talk a little bit about that again in a minute. Because as these new higher energies come in and help dissolve the patterns for us personally and everyone in society, it also removes, as we've often talked about, our old grounding points get removed and new ones made. And new old energetic connections to the etheric realm get dissolved because they're the old connections, and new ones that are part of our new growth happen. But it takes a while for us to get fully our energetic bodies to get regrounded in them, our brain to get used to using them, so where we can actually use our connections like we have been doing for years with our old connections. And when that happens, it causes us to feel uneasy. We find ourselves, the old patterns of our life aren't there, but the new patterns aren't in there. And we're seeing that in society a little bit. Some of the oddities you'll see in government, at various levels of government, and in businesses, are merely a reflection of the people that are in these occupying government or occupying business. Because of the changes that are happening with them, as the old connections are dissolved and the new ones are being made, and people are feeling psychologically less grounded, less connected, not sensing that sense of normalcy and that old rhythm of their life, but the new rhythm hasn't started. That reflects collectively in the responses of government and business. So a lot of people like to read things into these things, and sometimes there's something to be read into these institutional happenings. But most of the time, it really is just the nature of the unfoldment of the evolution that's happening, us on a personal level, put together collectively, as a unit of whether it's business or government. So, knowing that, the side effect of all these changes is because our emotional body is being rewired and our energetic bodies are being rewired and our brain is also being rewired, it can leave us feeling, again, uneasy, sensing that things just aren't right, and maybe our low self, of course, will feel like, when things are wrong, it feels like they'll always be that way, even though we all know that that's not the case. And it pushes our buttons. So one of the wonderful things that's happening right now is all the energies come in, as I mentioned, and it's evolving things, and the old patterns are falling away, and the new patterns are coming in, but haven't quite crystallized yet. And it's evolving us into the new patterns, which are coming, but just aren't quite here yet. The side effect is that it pushes our emotional buttons. It makes us feel uneasy. People can feel sad, angry, despondent, frustrated, confused. You're going to see it out there in society. You'll see it in the news. And just know that that's a reflection of what's happening on an individual basis. Some people handle it better than others. But what's important, and as we mentioned back with our posts in, I think it was in May and June, turning down the volume in our life. In other words, don't get caught up in the noise out there, and just really staying centered in our own connection and being guided in that. And just know that the new patterns will crystallize. The new normal will come in. It won't be what it once was. It's going to be different than that, because that's the old patterns. The new ones will come in, and all will be well again. And that brings us to that old adage, to be forewarned is to be forearmed. That's kind of a cliche. In other words, foreknowledge and awareness can really help us. If we know that the side effect of all this change happening to us is at the non-conscious level of our being, or the emotional level, the intuitive level, that it can feel uneasy and things can feel a little bit out of place, that can help us know that just stay the course and move forward. And one of the things that can help us, and we've talked about it already here, is spiritual practices and community. Some people, they like to do yoga. Others, it's meditation. Some, it's prayer. Others, they like to think a lot. They go for walks and they do a lot of introspection. All of them, being part of a spiritual community or just part of an extended community, can help us, because that community can help us focus on the positive, shifting our focus on where we want to be, not what's wrong out there, but what's right and where we're moving to, and can help us bring in the new patterns even quicker. And as I mentioned in the article, if we allow ourselves to get caught up in what's not right, rather than focusing on what is coming in, all the right things that are happening, we probably goes without saying, most of us don't wish to be the lead star in our own personal soap opera or drama series, like you see on TV. So it's really important that we stay connected. I know we've talked a lot about this in the past, all the subject, but I really felt like it was important to put it together in terms of what's going on in society, how it feels to us personally, what you see out there in government and business. They're just reflections of the changes that are happening. And as we mentioned, for those people, and there's a very significant part of the population that doesn't have the spiritual connections and the inner sense of community and support that they need, and they're left out there hanging, and then they can act out on their negative emotions, on what's bothering them, rather than focusing on the new patterns coming in and riding that wave of success, which is definitely coming our way. It's crystallizing now, and in time it will be all stable, and this period will be remembered more as a historical event, and not all the energetic and emotional content that it has right now. So with that, I hope these videos are of value to you, and we look forward to talking to you next time. And until the next video, blessings, light, and love. Bye-bye.